Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing remarkably well. I'm doing great, thank you very much, and I'm so delighted you've joined me for part 4 of our story tonight, and it's getting very, very interesting because we've learnt that Olivia's stalker is in fact her daughter, who's been stalking her because she believes that Olivia did not want to have anything to do with her growing up. So let's continue with our story. I'm not going to listen to this, I said, blocking my ears. My grandmother grinned at me. But I haven't finished, love. I haven't told you everything yet. I hurriedly bolted out of my grandmother's bedroom as fast as I could. I dashed down the stairs, 2 steps at a time. They creaked and groaned beneath my feet. I heard the old woman cackle with laughter, like a witch, almost as if she was having a joke at my expense. Your mother never wanted you, Jamie, she bellowed. She wanted to throw you in the dumpster. Hear that, Jamie? The dumpster! What kind of a mother would do that to her little girl? I dashed down the staircase, eyes filling with tears. I couldn't get away fast enough. I nearly tripped over piles and piles of newspapers and magazines, blocking my path, as Mrs. Wallace's clutter appeared to be hemming me in on every side, so I felt like a trapped animal that was unable to escape. My heart pounded violently in my chest, my breathing quickened, and I nearly screamed when someone touched me gently on my back. Go away! Leave me alone! Go away! I cried. I turned around expecting to see the old woman, or my grandmother if you like, having morphed into the devil, tapping me vindictively on the back with an old gnarled hand. But it was the kindly nurse that had stopped me. She looked very concerned about me. Is everything all right? What on earth is going on? What was all that about? I thought I heard Mrs. Wallace shouting. She wasn't shouting at you, was she? I'm fine, I said, trying to wipe away the tears from my face, with very little success. The nurse frowned. She took in my dishevelled state and my puffy red eyes. Has Mrs. Wallace upset you? She asked, shaking her head furiously. I probably should have warned you, love. Mrs. Wallace is a very pugnacious woman, who has a vendetta against the world, it would seem. Ostensibly her daughter has refused to visit her in her sick condition. She's been going on and on about what an ungrateful brat her daughter is. Most of the nursing staff at our hospice refuse to take care of her because she's so obnoxious. Take no notice of Mrs. Wallace. She's got a mouth on her that can run away with her. Even though she's dying, it hasn't turned her into a nice person, I'm afraid. I nodded. She's supposed to be my grandmother, you know. This is the first time I've ever met her. And then she says all this mean stuff to me. Mean, hurtful things, cruel things. I wanted to tell the nurse exactly what Mrs. Wallace had told me, but I couldn't say a thing. My tongue was involuntarily stuck to the roof of my mouth. My heart had become heavy. I had never met such a hard-hearted woman in all my life. And if this is what my grandmother was like, no wonder her daughter, who was my mother, was equally as vindictive. Didn't they say the apple does not fall far from the tree? She's a difficult woman, love. I had no reason to believe she'd be unkind to you. She told me that you were her long-lost granddaughter, that she was meeting for the very first time. So I thought that your presence might bring about a shift in her mood, turn her into a more pleasant human being. But it seems I was wrong about that. It must be upsetting to meet your grandmother in such miserable, unfavourable circumstances, and I blame myself for this. She's dying of cancer. She's the angriest patient I've ever taken care of to date. I think she blames God for her cancer. She's not embracing the dying process with any grace or dignity. She's not repentant about a single thing. You know, I've had patients before in my life that have been disagreeable, but Mrs. Wallace, well, she's the worst of the worst. She's probably only got days left to live, you know, but that woman's still got a nasty tongue on her. If she said anything mean to you, take no notice of it, love. She said some less than kind things to me, I can assure you of that. but I turn a blind eye to it. I remind myself that she's a dying woman. There's no point in being offended or affronted by any of her unkind words. I expect it's her way of lashing out at the world and letting off steam, I suppose. Now, why don't you come into the kitchen with me? We can have a nice chat together. I can give you a sweet glass of Coca-Cola. I'm sure it'll make you feel a lot better. It was very nice of you to come and visit your grandmother today. If I'd known she'd have treated you this badly, I'd have never let you see her. I'm really sorry about that. I need to go, I said, tears streaming down my cheeks. And before the nurse could persuade me to stay, I had bolted out of the house, hightailed it down the street, blinded by my tears. And when I reached the woods, I just ran and ran, until I just dropped to the ground underneath a tree with my satchel, and collapsed into a heap, where I continued to sob. When I could sob no more, as I had no tears left to cry, I reluctantly rose to my feet, leaving behind the tree where I had unleashed all my sorrow. I began to walk away, leaving my satchel spilled out on the forest floor. In my grief I'd forgotten all about it, and as I sashayed away, I was hit by a plethora of pebbles that began to shower me like a sandstorm of tiny stones. I stopped dead in my tracks, wondering what had happened. I turned around to survey my surroundings, and as I did so, my knapsack was hurtled towards me and landed square at my feet. That was when I saw a mischievous pyramid-shaped head peering at me from behind the trees, with brown, very bright eyes. I could see through the foliage a Herculean physique, overlong arms covered in long flowing dark hair. I heard a shrill whistle, followed by what I can only describe as a chuckle. I knew in that moment that I had seen a Bigfoot. I ran eagerly towards the creature, but it had disappeared into the woods. The Bigfoot had wanted me not to forget my knapsack, but it was so elusive, I don't think it wanted any kind of contact with me, and was long gone. I remembered asking myself if that had really happened, and thinking about the Bigfoot had a remarkable effect in easing my pain and washing away the grief I felt in my heart. I was soon to learn a week later that old Mrs. Prudence Wallace had died. I felt no empathy for her plight. She may have been my grandmother by blood, but she was an obnoxious woman. I was also to discover that Olivia, my birth mother, had not only renovated my grandmother's house, Silver Lakes, restoring it to its pristine condition, but she was now living there with her husband. I thought about what my grandmother Prudence had told me about my mother, that Olivia had wanted to throw me away in the trash, suffocate me in a plastic bag. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became, which was why I began to stalk my mother. She deserved to suffer, given what she had wanted to do to me all those years ago. I knew I had rattled my mother's cage, and it felt good to get my back on her. Much like my grandmother, she was a very bad woman. I was grateful I'd been raised by such good parents, who had loved me unconditionally. If there was anything good about Prudence Wallace, at least she had seen fit to get me adopted by decent people. The old woman had been watching me grow up for all these years, and before she died she wanted to spill the beans on my mother. One thing was clear to me. She hated her daughter almost as much as I did. I would get my revenge on Olivia. I couldn't believe that she had wanted to reject her own offspring. What kind of a person did that make her? I could never do that to my own little girl. Olivia's account. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. I knew a young lady had been stalking me, a teenager. But why? I needed answers. I couldn't help wondering if Mrs. Passmore, my next-door neighbour, was giving the young teenager money to scare me half to death, so that I would become unhinged and be forced to sell up my childhood home, Silver Lakes. I had a horrible gut feeling that Mrs. Passmore was behind all of this. That woman hated me living next door to her. Perhaps I was a constant reminder of what her son Kev had done to me all those years ago. I knew Mrs. Passmore was no idiot. She knew what Kev was really like. And I suspected, behind the threads of her denial, she knew he'd raped me all those years back. but refused to believe it. No mother wants to believe the worst of their son, for it reflects badly on them as a parent. Mrs. Passmore wanted me gone from the street, so she was paying a teenager to threaten me by sending me nasty notes in the post and making it very clear that they were so obviously stalking me. I was certain that this was what was going on. I thought about the Bigfoots that had rescued me after I'd been knocked out by the tree branch the previous night. Everything seemed so surreal in the cold light of day, as I thought over the event, that for a brief second I wondered if I had imagined it all. Maybe the nasty knock I had sustained on my head had caused me to hallucinate. It was almost easier to believe that that had been the case, a fabrication of my mind, but I knew it was not. I realized I had not thanked the female Bigfoots for their help, so I decided I would return to the grove, taking some snacks with me. I would leave them hanging on a branch in a plastic bag. I was hoping that the Bigfoots would find them and know they were from me. I bought a papaya, grapes, a bag of walnuts, some mixed dried fruit, a jar of peanut butter, some honey, some raisin and oat cookies, some salted kettle chips, beef jerky, banana bread, and apple turnovers. When it came to my stalker, I had done some digging around. I found the girl that lived at the Groves was the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Frieseland. Her name was Jamie. She was about 16 years old, and every Sunday the family attended the church on 8th Street. It would seem her parents were very religious. Now I knew what needed to be done, so I set my plan into motion. I knew that Jamie Frieseland liked to make her appearance outside my home at about 4:30 in the afternoon, as she had done so on several occasions. I would be waiting for her. I would pounce on her in the woods, as it was a private location, without any eavesdropping ears around. I would confront her about what she was doing to me, and get to the bottom of it. It was late afternoon when I told my husband that I was going for a walk in the woods. "Not again," he said, shaking his head grimly. "Look what happened to you this morning, love. You've still got a nasty bump on your head. You've had stitches, and the nurses at the hospital told you you've sustained quite a bump. They were surprised it didn't knock you out cold. I really don't think it's a good idea for you going wandering off like this on your own, in your current physical state. You need to take it easy, love. Relax. Give your head time to heal." "What I really need is some fresh air," I lied. "I want to go back into the woodgrove. I promise you I'm not going to bump my head again." "Very well," said my husband, "but don't you dare be long, or I'll come after you, and that's a promise. Make sure you don't go walking into any more branches. For God's sake, look where you're going this time, or something worse might happen to you. Imagine if I'm forced to take you back to the hospital 2 times in 24 hours. The nurses will smell a rat. They'll think I'm beating you up." "Never! Don't be ridiculous, Lenny. No one would ever believe that about you." It was a beautiful afternoon as I walked down the street. I could see a couple of kids in one of the properties chasing each other around in the yard, squealing in delight. Their childlike antics made me smile. I reflected on my own childhood, and how good the years were for me before I became a teenager. It had been so wonderful to be carefree, with no responsibilities, but when you're that age, you're clueless as to how good you have it. Was it any wonder Peter Pan wanted to stay young forever? I observed a gentleman walking down the street towards me. He was sporting jeans and a sweater which read, "It's a dog's life," which made me smile. He was walking 2 rambunctious mixed-breed dogs, who were both pulling forcefully on the lead, as if they couldn't walk fast enough. The man gave me a friendly nod, and stopped for a moment to introduce himself to me. "Hello there. The name's Lance Pilgrim. I've heard you've recently moved to the Silver Lakes house. Welcome to the neighbourhood. It's very nice to finally meet you." "Thank you very much. It's very nice to meet you as well." "And you are?" asked the man. "My name is Olivia." "I wanted to say, Olivia, congratulations in restoring your home. It looks absolutely superb. At one point it was quite tumble down." "Thanks. Well, I've tried." "You've done better than tried. You've done remarkably well. It needed some TLC, didn't it? The old woman that lived there before. I didn't know her personally, but let's just say she let the place go to seed. Rumour had it that she was quite the hoarder. I'm just glad you fixed the place up. It's always worth preserving old homes. They've got so much charm and character, don't you think?"
"Oh, yes, it was absolutely worth saving."
"Well, I better be going," he laughed. "My dogs don't like me idling around talking. You can see they're walking me, not the other way round."
"I can see that," I chuckled. I bid the man farewell, and before long I was standing on the trail beside the purple house. And there I was in the woods again. I was carrying the plastic bag of goodies in my hand, and I made my way down the rich earthen paths. The woodgrove was beguiling at this time of day, with soft whispers of late afternoon sunshine sprinkling their glittering light through the trees, so that it almost looked fairy tale-like. I soon found the tree where I'd been knocked out during the night, but the obtrusive branch had been broken off and tossed to one side. I suspected the female Bigfoots had done that on my behalf, so that the branch would never be a problem again, by rudely slamming into someone's head, and possibly even taking an eye out. I found a branch on the tree to hang the plastic bag, that I hoped the Bigfoots would retrieve. I was sure they would know it was from me. I found a good hiding place behind a curtain of shrubbery, as I waited for my stalker to make her appearance. There were no guarantees, of course, that Jamie Frieseman would come this way today, for she stalked me sporadically. On some afternoons I would see her figure hanging around outside our property from the upstairs window of my bedroom. But by the time I ran down the steps to the front door, she would always be gone. I would look up and down the street to the left and right, and I would not see her anywhere. I would sometimes feel I was going mad in my head, although at the time I was convinced my stalker was a man. Then at night time, while my husband was fast asleep, and I tossed and turned restlessly in my bed, thinking of the ominous notes I'd received in the post, saying things like, "I'm watching you, and I'll make you pay for what you did," I would surreptitiously tiptoe over to my bedroom window and stare outside through a crack in the curtain, and I would see Jamie Frieseman standing there, staring up at me, against the grim, rather gloomy, foreboding darkness of the night. I would often rush downstairs, try and confront her myself, but she was always gone, like a flash of light. If Mrs. Passmore was paying Jamie Frieseman to rattle me like this, the young teenager was doing a fabulous job, but it was going to end now. It was going to end today. I waited for a long while in the woodgrove rather impatiently, until my patience wore thin. I knew I needed to return home, thinking that this afternoon had been a waste of time. My stalker had decided not to come and harass me today. Maybe they'd be back tomorrow. I felt disappointment seep into my gut. I was eager to confront this teenager, to find out what the hell was going on with her. It would seem Jamie Frieseman was not coming after me, after all. All of a sudden I heard feet kicking the trail. I could hear footsteps, and a voice singing some hip-hop song that sounded rather trendy. I held my breath, my heart pounding violently in my chest. It was Jamie Frieseman. She was coming this way. This was a stroke of luck. This afternoon I'd finally get my answers. Jamie walked nonchalantly down the path, dressed all in black, but her hoodie was down, so that her long blonde hair began to blow in the wind. "Hello, Jamie," I said, blocking her pathway. "How do you know my name?" she asked gingerly. "I know quite a lot about you, Jamie Frieseman. I've been doing a little investigation, you see, and I know that you live at the Groves. I know you're the daughter of Mr. and Mrs. Frieseman, and that you attend church every Sunday, and that your parents are very religious. I know you've been stalking me, sending me very nasty notes in the post, threatening notes, written on pink cardboard in black Sharpie. Now I want to know exactly what is going on here. Has Mrs. Passmore put you up to this? Has she been paying you to stalk me, to get me to move? Is that what's going on here? She wants you to scare me, doesn't she? I don't know what you're talking about, and I don't know who you are. I'm not stalking you. Now will you leave me alone? I blocked her pathway. I stood there with a very furious expression on my face. You are going to talk to me, young lady. Do you understand? I said in a stern voice, grabbing Jamie by the arm so that she couldn't walk off. I wonder what the police would think if I reported you for stalking me and sending me those nasty notes in the post. I've collected them all, you know. I'm sure they'll have your fingerprints on them. And then there's your parents. What would they say if they knew you were doing this to me? I'm sure they wouldn't approve. Leave them out of this, will you? Mind your own business. Are you trying to threaten me or something? I'm not threatening anyone, Jamie, but I need to know why you are doing this to me. I know you are my stalker. I followed you last night. Do you remember when the bin fell over and the 2 little raccoons scuttled away? You actually laughed about that. I just need you to tell me. Did Mrs. Passmore put you up to this? I wouldn't be remotely surprised if she did. She hates me living next door to her. She's loathed me since I've been a teenager. I believe she's recruited you to scare me away from Silver Lakes so that I'll sell up the house and leave the area. Is that what's going on here? I need you to tell me the truth, Jamie. It's very, very important. Jamie's face paled. I don't know any Mrs. Passmore. All right, I admit it. I've been stalking you, but you deserve it. I wanted you to pay for what you've done to me. I want you to suffer, and really suffer, because you're a horrible, horrible person. Tears spilled into Jamie's eyes. I hate you. I really, really hate you. Isn't that a bit extreme, Jamie? You don't even know me. Why would you hate a perfect stranger? What have I ever done to you? I know what you did all those years ago. Your mother told me everything. She told me what kind of a person you are. I know the truth, and I know that you're a nasty, nasty, nasty person. You know my mother? I asked. I met her once, said Jamie stiffly. She told me what you did. It's disgusting, really disgusting, and I hate you. She began to sob. I really hate you. You wanted to throw me in the dumpster, leave me to die, suffocate me in a plastic bag. How could anybody be so evil? How could you hate me so much? What on earth are you talking about, Jamie? You're making no sense at all. For your information, I'd never willingly suffocate anything. I can't even kill a fly. So I don't know where this is coming from. I'm your daughter. Don't you get it? Said Jamie. I let out a stilted laugh. No, I don't think so. My daughter died weeks after she was born. I was informed by my mother. She was adopted, you see, and she died in her cot. You're not my daughter. But I am your daughter. I've got the birth certificate to prove it. On the birth certificate, my name is Lisa Jamie Wallace, but my parents have called me Jamie. On the certificate, it says my mother is Olivia Wallace. You're Olivia Wallace, aren't you? But that can't possibly be right. My daughter died shortly after she was born. That's what my mother told me. Your mother got in touch with me when she was dying. She wanted me to know I was adopted and that she was my grandmother. I didn't believe her at first. I thought some batty old lady was messing around with me until I discovered the birth certificates that my parents kept in the safe. My parents never told me I was adopted. I didn't have a clue about that. So I went to see your mother at her house. I went to Silver Lakes when she was dying. She said she discovered you giving birth to me in the kitchen. She said I was born before the EMTs arrived. She told me you wanted to toss me away in the garbage and be done with me. I mean, how could you? I was your girl. I don't understand, I said, looking at Jamie with a bemused look on my face. I thought you were dead.
My mother told me you died shortly after you were adopted. I believed her. She told me you had stopped breathing in your cot. I was absolutely devastated when I thought you were dead. I had in mind to look you up one day, you see, when you were older, because I had never wanted to give you up for adoption. I'd wanted to keep you. I asked my mother if there was a grave I could go and visit, and she said your parents had simply scattered your ashes. My mother has been lying to you. She lied to you, and she lied to me. She was a very bitter old woman. I hid my pregnancy from her because I knew she would force me to have an abortion. I really wanted to keep you. When my mother discovered me giving birth to you in the kitchen, she was livid. You have no idea how furious she was. I was hoping to deliver you on my own, but the pain was so excruciating. My mother woke up. She heard me. She called me a hussy and a trollop. She told me I brought shame on the Wallace name. She kept scolding me the whole time while I was giving birth to you. Can you imagine what that's like? You're giving birth to your baby and your mother is shredding you apart with her mean, cruel words. She phoned for an ambulance, but you were born before they arrived. Of course, when the EMTs arrived on the scene, my mother behaved like the most besotted mother. You were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen after you were born. I wanted to keep you with all my heart. I begged and begged my mother to let me take care of you, to raise you as my own. But she was having no part of it. She told me I was an absolute disgrace to the family, that I'd fallen pregnant so young, that I'd brought this all on myself, based on the skimpy clothes I wore at the time. It proved that I was a hussy. My mother insisted that I was far too young to be a mother. The kindest, the most selfless and generous thing for me to do was to give you up for adoption. She told me she knew of this lovely couple at the church who were desperate to have a child of their own. The mother had been trying IVF treatments, but to no avail. The church was praying for a miracle. I knew she was right. It would be the best thing to do. I was a teenager. I had no financial means to support you, so I agreed to the adoption. I also agreed not to know the people who were adopting you, but I did receive a lovely letter from your mother in the post, thanking me for you. You see, you were really, really wanted, Jamie. I'd never have wanted to throw you away in the dumpster. Are you kidding me? I couldn't believe that your mother honoured your second name. She called you Jamie. Your first name was Lisa. I called you Lisa Jamie Wallace. So she gave you your name, Jamie. But I don't understand. Your mother said... My mother said many things, Jamie. I'm sorry to have to say this to you, but she could be a very cruel woman at times. I'm only sorry she succeeded in hurting and upsetting you when you went to visit her. But I think she did it to get her back on me. It had nothing to do with you. It was probably because I never visited her when she was sick. She was dying and I didn't know it at the time. Jamie, don't forget my mother told me you were dead. I believed her. I grieved for you every single day. My mother hated me. I think she blamed me for my father's fortuitous death when he ate a cereal she bought for me that contained traces of peanuts. After that unfortunate event, she was hell-bent on tearing me apart limb from limb. And when I was a teenager, she chose to believe the very worst of me. She told everyone that I had more boys on the side than hot dinners. And that wasn't remotely true. So you wanted me? Asked Jamie. I thought you wanted me dead. Of course I wanted you, you silly little mare, I said. And the next thing I knew, Jamie had launched herself into my arms, and we both began to sob and sob. We sat down under a tree and talked for ages. I told Jamie about Prt4of4, being her real father, how he had violated me as a teenager, and as a consequence I'd fallen pregnant. I told her that Prt4of4 and his father were no longer in life, having both been killed in a car accident. I told her that my next-door neighbour, Mrs. Prt4of4, was her grandmother, and unfortunately I didn't have a good relationship with her. I knew I needed to tell Jamie the truth. She was an astute young lady. She deserved to know what had happened all those years ago. I wanted a relationship with my daughter, now that I'd found her again,
When I held her in my arms tightly to my chest, I felt as if a huge gaping hole in my life had at long last been filled, and however treacherous my mother may have been, she had inadvertently, unknowingly brought us together, for I may never have known that my daughter was alive. "I'm so sorry," said Jamie, "for stalking you, I mean, for sending you those really horrible notes. I was just so angry with you." "I don't blame you, but I'm glad you did what you did, Jamie. Don't you see, I might never have known you were alive if you hadn't tormented me like you did. But now I hope we can have a relationship together. How do you think your parents might feel about that?" "I'm not sure. I'm worried my parents won't be happy, because they don't know that I know I'm adopted. You never know. Maybe they'll be relieved you actually know. Sometimes parents of adopted children probably feel they're stuck between a rock and a hard place when it comes to telling their kids the truth. They might worry about being loved less by their kids, which I know is ridiculous, because your adopted mother will always be your mother, and you need to let her know that. She needs you to know that your birth mother imposes no threat to her as a parent. You should tell them the truth about everything. Look what lies have done. They create such chaotic upheaval, don't they? Look how you believed your grandmother's lies. You thought I hated you. You thought I wanted to throw you away, when nothing could be further from the truth. It grieves my heart that your grandmother told you so many dreadful lies, especially on her deathbed. You'd think at the end of life she'd have a more repentant heart. But I'm afraid some people do leave the earth in the spite they lived in. Well, I have to say, when I met the nurse who took me up to see your mother, she told me your mother was a very angry woman. She was furious she was dying. She said your mother had been the most disagreeable patient she'd ever cared for. When I visited your mother, she delighted in telling me that you wanted to throw me away. She actually cackled like a witch. I decided in that moment I hated her as much as I thought I hated you. She was so horrible." I sighed. "It saddens me to hear you say that, Jamie. You don't expect that from a dying woman. You would imagine that my mother would make her peace with everyone, especially you, as you were her grandchild. I think she was just angry with me and getting at you." Jamie nodded. "Maybe she was just trying to stir up trouble. That was my mother for you, Jamie. She did love to set the cat among the pigeons. But don't let that upset you. At least now you know the truth, and that's all that matters. About my adopted parents, you're right. I need to tell them that I know I'm adopted, and that I've met my birth mother." I embraced my daughter with tears in my eyes. I could smell the apple shampoo on her long blonde hair, and when I looked into her beautiful face, I could see my father in her. I felt like the luckiest woman in the world, as I had the quintessential opportunity to get to know my daughter that I thought had died years ago. I had never got over having to give her away as a baby, and then learning of her demise had literally shattered me. Why my mother had lied to me, I do not know, but I suspect it was once again out of spite. "Listen," said Jamie. "Listen to that." We suddenly heard a chorus of delighted whoops and chatter. "Kilaki ukopo, hilanikala, dolopada, kilakula bakasa, hikanakulakwa." "What's that?" asked Jamie. I grinned. "Come with me," I said, leading Jamie by the hand towards the tree that had owned a branch that had knocked me over the previous night, but thankfully was no longer there to inflict any more lethal damage on unsuspecting parties navigating their way through the woods. I was sure I knew what we would find, and I wasn't wrong. The 2 female Bigfoots were rifling through the plastic bag I'd left them on the tree branch, whooping with delight at what it contained, like 2 kids that had found the keys to a candy shop and are stuffing their pockets with their favourite treats. The 2 Bigfoots ferreted enthusiastically through everything. One of the Bigfoots was eagerly stuffing her face with walnuts. They stopped when they saw me and Jamie standing together side by side. They clapped their hands enthusiastically, as if seeing old friends that they were well acquainted with. One of the Bigfoots pointed to my head. She asked me telepathically, "Better?" I nodded. "Thanks for the gift," she said. "It was the least I could do," I said in my head, without articulating my thoughts loudly, because she understood everything I was thinking. Then she spoke to me in my head again and said, "It might be best if you don't visit the woods at night. Your eyes aren't really acclimatized to the moonlight. I saw the way you went flying into that tree branch." "Oh, don't worry," I replied in my head again. "My visits to the grove will be restricted to daylight hours only." "That might be better," came the reply. "Your eyes, they just aren't designed for nocturnal activities." We then watched the Bigfoots gliding through the trees, chattering happily together. And in that moment I knew I had never ever been happier. I had found my daughter. I was living in my childhood home again, and the ghosts of the past were finally behind me. In the end, it would seem my life ironed out perfectly like a crumpled piece of paper that had abandoned all its creases. I soon let my husband into the secret that I'd had a child as a teenager, and he was delighted to meet Jamie. Mrs. Passmore ended up having a relationship with her granddaughter. She even had the boldness to admit to me she knew her son Kev had raped me all those years back. My husband saw it all. It was too dreadful. He couldn't stop his son. He didn't know what to do at the time. He was devastated. I'm really sorry that Kev did that to you, Olivia." "I have no regrets, Mrs. Passmore. Your son Kev gave me Jamie, and she's a gift of God." "She sure is," said Mrs. Passmore. "I'm just glad that Jamie's parents are happy about her being involved in our lives. And I'm very glad you live next door to me as well, Olivia. I'm so sorry for all the terrible things I said to you. And I'm so sorry that your mother was such an unreasonable woman." "Don't worry about any of that. It's all in the past now," I said. "I'm just very glad that Jamie's around now, and that her parents know that she knows the truth." So there you are. That's my story. Wow, what can I say? That is an incredible story. Until next time, goodbye and good night.